with any software engineering role that gets advertised these days, you can pretty commonly have about 300 resumes or more, 300 applicants.
So Dan, how do you stand out in the crowd if there is 300 resumes or more?
That's a very good question, Fred, and I think we need to cover today the 5 biggest mistakes that software engineers make on their resumes. You know what I see a lot of is that software engineers find it really difficult to talk about themselves.
I find it difficult to talk about myself.
Recruiters, when they look at a resume, you've got 7 seconds, right? At most 7 seconds. So you want to hit a recruiter, someone or a hiring manager who's reviewing a resume, 7 seconds to impress them. So the most important bit is the paragraph on the top of your resume, right at the top.
So how do you write that 7-second paragraph?
There's a few things that are very important that have to be in that paragraph. Okay. One is how you're different from everybody else.
I like that. I like it. How to be different than anybody else.
That's right. You have to stand out in front of 300 others. Therefore, you have to talk about who you are and how you're different. The second thing you have to do is talk about your passions, what you're passionate about, what fires you up.
Firing you up. Right. Talk about yourself. 7 seconds. Fire me up, baby.
Well, so we need to know who you are. And the thing is, what's very interesting about recruiters is because they're people, that's what they're actually wanting to know. The other point to note about this too is the recruiter's job is to sell you to the employer. So you need to give them all the ammunition that they need so that they can go and sell you to somebody else.
7 seconds. How do you know if it's too much?
Oh, there's quite an easy way to know if there's too much. It's the little page count in your word processor that says, hey, you've gone too far.
Count me.
I would say, I'd be interested to hear what you think, Fred, but I would say the absolute maximum number of pages on your resume should be 2 pages.
2 pages. Totally agree.
You know, I've heard actually that there's on the internet, when this topic comes up and people say 2 pages is all you need, a lot of people say, but I've worked in tech for 20 years. How can I put that into 2 pages?
I think I would be one of those people who would ask that question. How do I take over 20 years of rumbling in the jungle and chucking it in on 2 pages? How do you do that, Dan?
The thing is that we need to know who you are, but we don't need too much of who you are.
Not too much.
Not too much. Actually, what's interesting about what you do put in those 2 pages is that that's laying the bait for the interview, right? Because the resume is just designed, its main objective is just to get an interview. Once you've got the interview, you've laid the bait, you've laid the groundwork for people to come and ask you about what's on your resume. So if it's too comprehensive, has too much information, you've already answered all the questions they're going to have. So what's the point of interviewing you? Oh, I already have everything I need. I can just say no to Fred.
Why would they say no to Fred? I mean,
well, of course not.
It's amazing.
Pretend
things about
Fred.
Keywords, Dan. Keywords in the resume. What are those key things you have to put in your resume to make sure that you are popping out?
Well, I think if you talk about yourself and you make sure you're talking about how you're different, you still need to cover some of the keywords that are related to technologies you're happy to work with. So make sure that's in place. One of the things, though, that's very interesting that sometimes is a trap that engineers fall into is that they may bring up negative things about themselves or their previous projects in the past. Yeah. And sometimes it can be quite subtle. Sometimes it's not, immediately obvious that you've done it. What's a really good idea is to get, if you've got a resume, have someone trusted, like a friend, read it and give you feedback and ask them for things like these points that we're talking about in the video. Get them to review it and go, well, actually, there's some stuff here you could probably reword, make it a bit more positive.
Engineers, when they're writing in the resumes, they write it as if the interviewer or the person looking at this resume has been working with you at the organizations or the companies that you worked with, sitting next to you.
Very interesting if you put like product names, project names, jargon, all those kinds of things in the description of your role, someone else is not going to know anything about what you're talking about, right?
Project code name.
this is like, you need to know your audience, right? Like, what do you need to communicate correctly to your audience? What's their frame of reference, right? What's their context and their world look like? They don't know anything about your previous employer. I think that's safe to assume. Sometimes they do, but let's assume they don't. I think that's a safe assumption. Make sure when you're talking about your previous work and projects, make sure you write what you did, not so much what your team did, but what you did, and put it in as like achievements. This is what I did that was above and beyond. This is how I helped make it successful.
So it's not we, it's me.
Because I'm not interviewing the team. I'm interviewing you. So you got to tell me.
So resumes is not a team game.
You've been lied to our whole life, Fred. It's not really about the team.
Dan, code me up. Code me up.
When I'm interviewing people, I really want to see code. Now, I'm not a recruiter, right? I'm on the hiring manager side. But when I'm looking at someone's resume, if somebody puts a link to their GitHub or GitLab or whatever Git they've got going on, if you put a link on your resume, that's great. But there's so many developers that put a link on their resume, and then you go click on it, and there's nothing there.
There's nothing there.
Well, maybe there's something there, but it's poor quality code. It's tutorials maybe that they've done and played with, things they've experimented with.
Yes.
It's forked projects of other people's code that you've just forked and that appears in your profile. All these kind of things. Maybe they have code, but there's no README files, there's no tests, there's no documentation, there's no explanation on how to run the code, there's no even explanation on what the code does, all sorts of issues and problems. So if you're going to put your GitHub link on your resume, make sure that you're putting your best code right up the top. Say, this is me. This is how good I can code. So they're the 5 biggest mistakes that engineers commonly make on their resumes. And these 5 mistakes are going to be stopping people from getting jobs. Their resumes get shredded in the shred pile. We don't want that. We don't want that to happen.
No, we don't. No.
Well, hopefully this video has done the job, Fred.